Hi. So we are continuing our journey on Fanon's readings and on the national culture. First, I would like to tell you that in case you are concerned about the biases that an instructor might have when they grade the essay, I would like to tell you that when I will grade your papers, I won't see your name. I will see your grade and your name after I publish all the grades. Therefore, even though I see you twice a week, I won't be biased because I don't know who I'm grading. Um, Also, I would like to encourage you to do your best. So your paper is due in 2 weeks. Uh, as I said, you are encouraged to use the library resources to help you write an essay. So if you are not familiar, they have this document. Okay, you cannot see it. Okay. Anyway, it's called Introduction and Conclusions, and it tells you what we are supposed to see in an introduction and what we are supposed to see in a conclusion. So maybe it will help to remind yourself of what you are supposed to do. So I expect you to do the best paper that you have written in your life, and maybe as a motivation you can tell yourself that you can submit this paper or a modified version of the paper to the undergraduate philosophy journal that we have here at the University of Guelph. So um, it will be good for your career to have some published papers. I think it's all I wanted to say on that subject. Um, I would like to go back to what we said Tuesday. We said so. It was in 1960s. It was a decolonization period globally. Therefore, Fanon was expecting to see Algeria being decolonized, being independent, being um, independent country. But he was worried that with the propaganda and the international relations, political relations, economic relations that Algeria will have with other countries in the world and in Africa. Therefore, he felt the need to write The Wretched of the Earth, which proves that he anticipated the neo-colonialism that we experience today. National culture, therefore, is the fourth chapter of The Wretched of the Earth, and what we discussed Tuesday is that Fanon presented three stages in the conversion of the intellectual colonized. And if we want to make some connections between this chapter and what we have seen so far, uh, we remember that the colonizer for the colonized is an ideal self, is the God, is the Son, the father. Um, so we discussed Tuesday how can we find truth about ourselves. The colonized at the first stage defined himself from his father, the light of his father, the gaze of his father. So the father is a mirror and is also an idealized version of himself. Um, so since the father is the mirror, the colonized develop an inferiority complex. It comes from looking at the father. And so to combat the anxiety, uh, and the ambivalent feeling he had towards his father, he, or the colonizer, he, he expressed himself through his art, but his art has this same language and same aesthetics and same ethics as the colonized. That's why we are talking about an assimilation stage. And politically, we can say that the colonized contributes to the oppression of his people. So this painting that you see, this painting um, comes from the book Memoirs of the Blind, and as we can see, we can think of it as the colonizer. So he is the sun, the God, and the eye. So he is looking at the colonized, and the colonized looked at him. And so the eye is both a mirror and um, and and also an idealized version of the self. So trying, they all look at this eye, um, and also the sun. I it's is also tell tells you what to look at. So the light of the sun enlight certain aspects in the surrounding world and also hide other aspects in the world. So some aspects are in the shadow and some aspects are in the front, and that's because of the perspective of the light. And so you can make the comparison with what the colonized is able to see in his world. So what he sees is what the father tells him to see, and he's blind to other um, aspect of his environment. He doesn't want to see it. So the lights tell him where to look at. Okay. And we discussed the return to the ancestor, which is the second phase of the conversion. So what will provoke the return to the ancestors? It's when the colonized intellectual see an event that is so shocking that he cannot stay blind anymore. He has to face a reality that is very ugly. So we're talking about violence. So we can talk about the massacres of thousands of Algerians by the French people, or massacres in Madagascar, massacres in Senegal by the French people. So this is a violent reality that forced the colonized intellectual to leave this assimilation stage. It can't. It's too violent. It cannot stay there. But he is lost in the same time. So he doesn't know who he is anymore, because, as we said earlier, the colonizer was an ideal self and a mirror. So who is it? He has to find uh, through his past. So it's a contemplation of his cultural past, his ancestors, uh, so as a way to define himself again. But Fanon says that because it's a petrified conception of the culture, an inert, a dead conception of the culture, it cannot go very far. It's not realistic to define yourself in that way. So, just to make you connect with what we have seen so far, last week we talked about this assimilation stage, but in West Indies. So West Indies had this assimilation stage, colonized Algeria had this assimilation stage, West Indies has had this return to the national culture, the negritude, so trying to connect with the black people from Africa, but that led to a dead hand because first of all, African people did not want this connection and thought rightly that the fight for freedom for black people in Africa is very different than the fight for freedom for black people in West Indies. So the solidarity was hard to find. Um, but for Algeria, after this um, return to the national culture, Fanon added a third stage, which is the combat stage. So we'll go back to this in 2 seconds. So I talked about this notion of catharsis. So it's a channel, an outlet whereby the energy accumulated in the form of aggressiveness can be released. So Fanon defined that concept in the chapter 6 of Black Skin, White Mask. And so it was not in the required readings, but you responded to this concept. So when I defined it in the first time, I just talk about how black people serve as a collective catharsis for white people. But it's not the only way you can see this, you can understand this notion of catharsis. So black people also has catharsis, also have catharsis, sorry. And for Fanon, it's in the West Indies, this catharsis is in the protest, peaceful protest in Martinique. And so I read you that a part of the letter that Fanon sent to his friend, he said, that this protest was only a release, something like an erotic dream, as if it's not very dangerous. The colonized are not put in danger with this protest, and so they let them do that, and just so the West Indian can express a little bit their aggressiveness, but still very controlled by the colonized. So that's what Fanon didn't like about this peaceful protest in West Indies. And we see the same idea, the same theme on national culture. He said, the colonialists encouraged those bitter, desperate recriminations and facilitated their publication. The occupier, in fact, likened these heated words to an act of catharsis. So we are in the return to the ancestors stage, so the second stage. And so in the art, the colonized express his anger or his frustration towards the colonizer, but it's still not very dangerous. It does not put in danger the supremacy, hegemony uh, of the French people. So French people say, yeah, you can do that. I don't care because I'm still the most powerful in this equation. So return to the ancestors is expressed in this art movement, cultural movement that is called Negritude, which seems to be, according to the text National Culture, a idealization of the cultural past. So as I said, in the assimilation phase, the colonized was the ideal self, and then now in the negritude, the cultural past is the ideal self. But it's conflictual, it's painful, but because it's a phase where the colonized intellectual tries to remove everything that comes from the white. So it reveals the anxiety and the nausea of the colonized. But for Fanon, it also reveals an opening in the mind of the colonized intellectuals for a better future. When you are in the assimilation phase, you were, oh, everything is fine, I'm happy. But in the negritude phase, you are, no, it's not right, and it must be better. Uh, Life is not, it cannot be that life is just that. So for Fanon, it's a step towards resistance. Just the fact that you disagree with what is going on is a crucial step towards resistance. But it has to be more. So now we are in the combat stage of the national culture. So what pushed you to the combat from the return to the national culture to the combat stage? It's still violence. So violence is too much. And so now the literature changed. So, Fanon brings this example from Keita Fodeba, this story, African Dawn, in French, Aube Africaine, which is a fictional story, but it denounces the massacre of about 400 colonized Africans. So these people were living in colonized countries in Africa. And then the Second War happened. So France asked them to join the war, help them, but they became prisoners of Germany. But Germany, because they feared racial contamination, they didn't want to keep these prisoners, and so they transferred them to occupied lands in France. So Germany occupied France, and they put their black prisoners in France. But then France got liberated at the end of the war, and so they took these Africans, soldiers who were fighting for them, and they took them to go back to Africa where they belong, so where they came from. But instead of going back to their respective countries, they go to Senegal. And these soldiers asked the French officials to pay them, to just give them their paycheck, because soldiers are paid. But apparently the French official refused, and instead decided to kill them. And the official story is from France is that there was a rebellion, and so they were forced to kill. But historians today refute that story because they see evidence that, sorry, there is a fly, that this was premeditated. Because the amount of weapons that was there tells the historians that these people were meant to be killed. It was already decided, so it was not the consequence of a rebellion. So, but for Africa, it was, or for Keita Fodeba, it was already obvious, even though still today it is a debate. France does not want to recognize their responsibility for their death. And people are still fighting for the justice of these people, for these African soldiers. So that's what the combat stage of the national culture is about. It's about people who are engaged in the action of the revolution, as opposed to the stage before, previous stage, in which the colonized was just standing aside of the revolution, just watching, not participating. But now in the combat stage, the people who write are the people who are in the action. So Fanon wrote, during this phase, many men and women find themselves in exceptional circumstances, in prison, in the resistance, on the eve of their execution, feel the need to proclaim their nation, to portray their people, and become the spokesperson of a new reality in action. So, combat stage of national cultures, the writers are people who are about to die. Some of them are about to die. So they are in their jail, they are about to be executed, so they know it's the end. But before leaving this earth, they want to leave a trace to their people, so they know what is going on. So everything is for the national cause, national consciousness. So it's a revolutionary literature. So, and in the US, we can compare that to this book, Still Black, Still Strong, in which people, for example, people from the Black Panthers who got captured by the FBI and then jailed for 30 years or sentenced to death. So these people, before leaving this earth, left us some revolutionary writings. So they pass the torch to the next generation. That's the idea. Keep fighting. So it seems that Fanon is saying that what these testimonies tell us is more valuable than what these colonized intellectuals who are in the comfort of their home write. So really, for Fanon, it seems that what is true, the truth comes from the struggles, the truth comes from the confrontation. You have to be in the field to know the truth. Um, so the evidence that we are now in this combat stage of the national culture, Fanon said, look at the art. The art has changed. So in the paintings, we see colors that were forbidden that are now actually used. And so also the wood carving used to be inert faces, but now it's raised arms. So it's the idea of action, the idea of motion instead of the idea of being petrified and dead. And so even the old tales, they are modernized for the national consciousness. So people can put their messages in their old, in these old tales. Also new styles of jazz. So Fanon said that jazz in the US used to be like the blues, so it was just a black person crying over his pain. So he said, for white jazz fans, jazz could only be the spoken, desperate yearning of an old N-word, 5 whiskeys under his belt, bemoaning his own misfortune and the racism of the whites. So jazz used to be this blues, but now after that there is this bebop, another style of jazz that for Fanon seems more valuable. But this take is questionable according to Lewis Gordon. I don't have the book. Okay, but Gordon said in his book, born of racial suffering, the blues, according to Fanon, could be maintained only by that specific malediction. Thus, whites who listen to the blues are, in Fanon's reading, entertained by the suffering the political location has created. But non-black listen to blues all over the world, not thinking about cotton plantations or those occupying prison cells. So what Lewis Gordon said is that Fanon is wrong to think that only white, only black people sing blues, and if white people like that, it's because they like to hear the suffering of the black people. So the fact that many people in the world enjoy the sound of the blues without thinking of black people in plantation or black people in prison cells, tells Gordon that blues is not just um, not just this inert mummified culture. It's more vibrant than that. But okay, who cares? Also, modernization of old tales. Um, I just wanted to say that Derek Bell, the lawyer and critical race theorist, uh, reminds us that the slave songs, enslaved people songs, were were not also just ossified, petrified version of cultural past. So Derek Bell said, it was a long time before the masters learned, if they ever did, that the slaves used their songs as a means of communication, giving warning, conveying information about escapes planned and carried out. So again, we use something from the past to make it subversive and use it for the future. So the slaves were singing these old spirituals, and the master let them sing it because they thought it sounds good and it's harmless. But actually, in the songs, there were codes telling the other slave what will be the next plan for the escape. So there are messages inside the songs that provide some information for the future. So that's, in that sense, it's revolutionary. So I remind you that next Tuesday we don't see each other. We will see each other next Thursday, and we will finish our discussion on Fanon with the chapter on violence, which is also in The Wretched of the Earth, and I ask you to read from page 30 to 47 at least, and underline the sentences or the paragraphs that you find illuminating or intriguing, or anything that you want to discuss with the rest of the class. So what we can do, even though we used to use this discussion time to answer one of my questions, we can change the formula if you want, and use this discussion time as if we were a reading group. Uh, so yeah, we can stay more connected to the text if you want. So now this is the discussion time, and my only question is about the need for oppressed people to have a culture, a national culture to connect with. Thank you.